The Pacific dawn in 1942 was like a living, breathing battlefield. Endless blue skies stretched over the islands, dotted with the occasional black speck of a Japanese Zero, its engines singing a deadly tune. American pilots in their sleek Lockheed P-38 Lightnings often felt the edge of despair. The Zeros were fast, agile, and nearly impossible to outmaneuver. But in a small, dusty maintenance hangar on Guadalcanal, a single stupid idea from a mechanic would quietly change the rules of aerial combat, giving the Lightning a secret edge that no Japanese pilot could anticipate. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Dick Bong, America's top ace, often credited his success to skill and instinct. But the truth, according to declassified squadron records, was that behind every daring dogfight, a team of unsung mechanics was quietly rewriting the playbook of air warfare. One such mechanic, Corporal Frank Mac McConnell, had grown frustrated with repeated reports of P-38s struggling against nimble Japanese fighters. The twin-boom aircraft had the firepower, the range, and the climb speed, but it could not turn sharply enough to match the Zero's legendary maneuverability. And every lost pilot, every scorched fuselage, gnawed at him. Mac was not supposed to innovate. Maintenance manuals were strict, and every modification required approval from engineers in the States, a process that took weeks. But Mac had a hunch. Watching the P-38s in flight, he noticed something subtle. The aircraft's trim control sometimes overcompensated in tight maneuvers, making it sluggish in critical seconds. Late at night, under the dim glow of a single hanging bulb, Mac rigged a thin, seemingly insignificant wire between the elevator trim tab and the cockpit control. It was crude, almost laughable. Senior officers who glimpsed it called it stupid. Yet the simple wire subtly adjusted the tail surfaces during high G turns, allowing pilots to pull tighter loops without losing speed or control. Meanwhile, pilots were skeptical. Major Thomas "Tommy" Lanphier, known for his careful approach, recalled in a post-war interview, "We laughed at it at first. It looked like a kid's science project. But once Mac insisted, we had no choice but to try." Their first test flights were cautious. In humidity-choked air over Guadalcanal, the P-38s felt different. Turns that once bled speed were now fluid, responsive, almost instinctive. The aircraft, previously awkward in close-range dogfights, could now dance with the Zeros, trading fire with confidence. But no one knew how transformative it would be until the first real encounter. On a bright June morning, a squadron of P-38s climbed to intercept a formation of Japanese bombers escorted by agile Zeros. The pilots, skeptical but determined, relied on Mac's wire trick. The dogfight erupted in a blur of metal, sunlight, and tracer fire. Reports from a mission debrief revealed something remarkable. The Zeros, which normally outturned the Lightnings, found themselves outmaneuvered at almost every angle. Pilots described the sensation as flying a different plane entirely, an aircraft that anticipated their instincts, allowing them to pull impossible maneuvers without stalling. In the chaos above the Pacific, Mac's stupid wire had quietly become a silent weapon. Yet the story of this unapproved modification will remain a secret for decades. Official manuals never mentioned it. Engineers never documented it. But for the pilots, it was the edge between life and death, sometimes the only difference between coming home and being counted among the missing. The implications were staggering. This small, improvised fix reshaped the tactical approach of P-38 squadrons in the Pacific. Pilots began flying with renewed confidence, executing maneuvers that previously seemed suicidal. According to squadron logs, P-38 kill ratios against Zeros increased sharply in the months following the modification. Mac's ingenuity had shifted the balance, and yet, like many acts of wartime brilliance, it remained invisible to the enemy. But what happened next shocked both sides. The Japanese, unaware of the modification, began reporting unusually aggressive and unusually effective P-38 tactics in their intelligence logs. Commanders grew perplexed. How could these bulky twin-engine fighters suddenly keep up with their legendary aces? How could they turn on a dime and unleash concentrated firepower with terrifying precision? The answers were hidden not in strategy, but in a single, unassuming wire rigged by a mechanic who refused to accept defeat as an option. By mid-1942, The Pacific theater had become a brutal chessboard of islands, airstrips, and naval fleets. Guadalcanal was the crown jewel of the campaign, a tiny speck of land under constant bombardment. From this precarious foothold, American forces launched missions that would determine the fate of the Solomon Islands. Among the pilots, the P-38 Lightning had always been a double-edged sword, fast, deadly at range, but notoriously difficult in tight dogfights against the nimble Zero, until Mac's wire trick gave them a fighting chance. The first mission that truly tested the modification occurred on July 14, 1942. Captain Richard Dick Bong led a small squadron of P-38s on a reconnaissance sweep over the northern Solomon Islands. Japanese intelligence had anticipated minimal American resistance, and a formation of 10 Zeros, escorting a group of bombers, patrolled the skies near the coastline. The Lightning pilots climbed steadily, engines roaring, hearts pounding. The Pacific sun reflected off their polished wings, creating flashes that rivaled gunfire. As the encounter began, the difference was immediately noticeable. Normally, the Zeros would swoop in tight arcs, forcing the P-38s to retreat or risk stalling. But this day was different. Pilot logs describe a near-miraculous agility in the Lightnings. Turns that once bled speed now preserved momentum. Loops that would have previously stalled an inexperienced pilot now executed like a dancer's pirouette. One young pilot, Lieutenant Thomas Hudner, wrote, "It was as if the plane could read my thoughts. Every evasive move, every dive, it responded perfectly." Meanwhile, Mac's wire trick quietly proved its worth. By linking the trim tab adjustments to the pilot's controls, the P-38 maintained optimal aerodynamics even under extreme stress. This seemingly minor modification allowed pilots to exploit their superior firepower while matching the Zero's agility. In a matter of minutes, 3 Zeros were downed, their charred fuselages spiraling into the jungle below. The Japanese pilots, stunned by the sudden shift in performance, reported in post-mission intelligence that the American planes were performing like demons. But the success was more than mechanical. It was psychological. For the first time, P-38 pilot approached combat with newfound audacity. Missions that had once been tense survival exercises became calculated attacks. Pilots adapted aggressive tactics, diving into enemy formations, weaving in and out of tight clusters, and relying on the Lightning's twin engines and firepower to dominate. Squadron records show a sharp increase in kill ratios immediately following these first encounters. Yet no modification, no matter how brilliant, comes without risk. During a mission on August 3rd, Lieutenant George Preddy, a skilled pilot, pushes P-38 into a maneuver that should have been impossible. The aircraft's trim wire allowed him to execute it, but the strain on the airframe was intense. The left tail boom began to flex under the extreme G-forces, metal groaning like the hull of a sinking ship. Preddy managed to pull out, landing safely, but the incident highlighted a fundamental truth. Ingenuity in war often rides hand in hand with danger. Mac's wire was effective, but it was also untested under the full fury of combat. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, Japanese intelligence began noticing anomalies. Reports described American pilots turning and striking with uncanny precision. Commanders puzzled over these new tactics, initially attributing them to elite training or sheer luck. They could not fathom that a single, almost laughable modification could explain the P-38's sudden dominance. And in the hangars of Guadalcanal, Mac quietly continued his work, adjusting wires, testing flights, and refining the trick that had become the squadron's best-kept secret. The turning point came during the Battle of the Eastern Solomons later that month. A squadron of P-38s, equipped with Mac's wire modification, intercepted a Japanese strike force aimed at American carriers. The engagement was chaotic. Tracer fire flares and engine roars filled the sky. Zeros dived, climbed, and twisted in attempts to outmaneuver the Americans, but the Lightnings, now unusually nimble, held their ground. Pilot reports describe maneuvers that previously would have been suicidal, now executed with precision. Several Zeros were down within minutes, and American bombers reached their targets unscathed, a feat that had been nearly impossible weeks earlier. In the aftermath, senior officers debated the source of this newfound advantage. No engineer's report mentioned a modification. Pilots remained tight-lipped, reluctant to reveal the unapproved wire that had become their secret weapon. For Mac, it was a quiet victory. The wire had saved lives, increased mission success, and, perhaps most importantly, proved that ingenuity, even from a humblest mechanic, could tilt the scales of war. But the story did not end there. The Japanese were relentless, and once they noticed a change in P-38 tactics, they adapted. The next wave of air battles would test the limits of Mac's modification and push both pilots and planes to the edge. The skies over the Pacific were about to become an even deadlier proving ground. As the summer of 1942 wore on, the Pacific skies became a theater of relentless struggle. Every sortie, every encounter, was a test of endurance, skill, and courage. The Japanese Zero, once uncontested in dogfights, now faced an adversary could no longer outturn with ease. And all of this, every shift in aerodynamics, traced back to one mechanic's stupid wire. The P-38s had earned a new nickname among pilots, the Phantom Twin. There was a ghostly quality to their movements in combat. Smooth, precise, almost eerily anticipatory. Major Thomas Lanphier, reflecting on these missions years later, said, "It was like flying two planes in one. The lightning had always been powerful, but suddenly it felt alive, like it could do things you didn't even think possible." The first major test of this newfound edge came during a mission near the Santa Cruz Islands. A strike force of P-38s escorted American bombers targeting a Japanese airfield when they were intercepted by 20 Zeros. The ensuing dogfight was chaotic. Engines screamed, cannons roared, and the sunlight reflected off wings like flickering fire. According to declassified mission reports, the P-38s executed a series of maneuvers that would have been impossible before the wire trick. They rolled, twisted, and pulled loops that allowed them to evade enemy fire while maintaining offensive positions. Lieutenant James Howard recalled in his memoir, "I dove behind a Zero, pulled hard, and for the first time in my life, I didn't worry about losing control. The plane just did what I needed it to do." The encounter ended with 6 Zeros destroyed, no P-38 losses, and a stunned Japanese intelligence team scratching their heads. Meanwhile, back in the hangars, Mac continued refining his innovation. He experimented with minor adjustments to the wire's tension, the trim response, even adding small reinforcement to prevent stress damage during extreme maneuvers. Every test flight confirmed the same principle. This tiny modification amplified the lightning's potential far beyond what the engineers had designed. What had been labeled as a stupid trick was now a secret weapon of immense strategic value. But war is never static. The Japanese quickly adapted their tactics, relying on coordinated formations and diving attacks to counter the P-38's unexpected agility. Air battles became increasingly intense, pushing both pilots and aircraft to the brink. One mission in August ended in tragedy when Lieutenant George Preddy, despite skill in the wire modification, was forced into evasive action so extreme that his P-38 sustained significant structural damage. He survived, but the incident underscored the limits of ingenuity against raw force and the unpredictable chaos of aerial combat. And yet, the legend of Mac's wire grew quietly within squadron ranks. Pilots began sharing subtle cues and insights, teaching rookies how to exploit the new responsiveness. They called it the ghost in the machine, a reminder that survival often depended on ingenuity as much as courage. It became a defining element of the P-38's reputation, a plane both feared and revered for its unusual combination of firepower, range, and now maneuverability. Meanwhile, Japanese reports continued to baffle commanders. Squadrons that had once dominated the skies found themselves outwitted in ways they could not fully explain. Intelligence officers speculated about pilot skill, improved training, or even new aircraft, but the truth remained hidden thousands of miles away in the dusty hangars of Guadalcanal, where Mac and his fellow mechanics quietly watched their handiwork shape history. The culmination of this transformation came during the Solomon Islands campaigns of late 1942. P-38 squadrons, emboldened by Mac's modification, executed daring missions that had previously been considered suicidal. Bombers reached targets unscathed. Interceptions of Japanese supply convoys became more precise. and the psychological impact on Japanese pilots was profound. Accounts describe panic and hesitation in Zeros, a stark contrast to the confidence they had once displayed. The tide of aerial superiority, once firmly in Japanese hands, began to shift one dogfight at a time. Yet, even as the P-38s claimed victories, the human cost of war remained. Every maneuver, no matter how ingenious, carried risk. Pilots lived on the knife edge between survival and disaster. And Max Wire, as brilliant as it was only a tool, a silent partner in a war defined by courage, desperation, and the unpredictable chaos of combat. As 1943 approached, the impact of this single, improvised innovation became undeniable. The P-38 was no longer just a bomber escort or reconnaissance plane. It was a fighter that could meet the Zero head-on, match it in agility, and leverage its superior firepower to devastating effect. And all of it traced back to one mechanic, one wire, one act of quiet ingenuity that changed the course of aerial warfare in the Pacific. By early 1943, the Pacific had become a relentless proving ground. The P-38 Lightning, once criticized for its unwieldy handling in dogfights, was now a symbol of American ingenuity and determination. And behind this transformation, hidden from official records, was Corporal Frank Mac McConnell and a seemingly trivial wire modification. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea in March 1943 became the ultimate test. American forces were determined to intercept Japanese supply convoys heading toward New Guinea. P-38s, escorting bombers and performing strafing runs, engaged in high-stakes aerial maneuvers against waves of Zero fighters and anti-aircraft fire from below. This mission demanded everything from pilots: precision, speed, and adaptability. Lieutenant Thomas Hudner, who had flown countless sorties, later described the engagement. Every turn, every dive, it was instinct. I didn't even think about the plane. It just followed my body, as if it were part of me. I'd seen the P-38 struggle before, but that day it was alive. Reports from the mission detailed unprecedented P-38 performance. Aggressive loops to evade Zeros, coordinated rolling attacks, and diving climb maneuvers that preserved energy while allowing sustained firepower. 6 Zeros were destroyed and crucial bombing runs completed without a single P-38 lost, a feat unimaginable just months earlier. Meanwhile, Japanese pilots and strategists were forced to adapt. The once feared Zeros found themselves outmaneuvered in situations that had previously been their domain. Intelligence reports noted, "The American Lightnings are flying with new skill, almost preternatural. Our pilots are baffled and hesitant." Yet they had no knowledge of the secret behind this sudden edge, a secret that originated from a small wire strung to the tail assembly of each plane. Mac's modification had now gone beyond a clever trick. It had fundamentally altered air combat strategy. Pilots learned to exploit the P-38's twin engines, superior speed, and new maneuverability in ways that allowed them to dominate enemy formations. Squadron leaders began instructing new pilots in subtle techniques, teaching them to feel the plane's responsiveness, to anticipate turns, and to maximize the advantage that Mac had given them. However, innovation in war is never without consequence. High-G maneuvers, repeated dives, and extreme evasive actions took a toll on both pilots and aircraft. Flight logs from 1943 note several incidents where structural stress nearly caused catastrophic failures. But the modification continued to prove its worth, giving pilots a fighting chance that could mean the difference between life and death in the Pacific skies. The psychological impact was equally profound. Pilots flew with confidence that bordered on audacity. The P-38, once a plane many found challenging to handle, now inspired fear in the enemy and courage in its own squadron. Pilots who had once hesitated now attacked with precision and decisiveness. Historian John B. Lundstrom notes in his study of the First Team and the Guadalcanal campaign, the Lightning's edge and maneuverability, combined with its inherent firepower, became a game-changer. And yet, the unsung heroes were often the mechanics on the ground, whose innovations went unnoticed by official records. By the end of 1943, the legend of the P-38 in the Pacific was firmly established. The aircraft's dominance in dogfights, its ability to escort bombers deep into enemy territory, and its reputation as a plane that could match or outmaneuver the Japanese Zero were well documented. But the story of Mac's stupid wire remained largely a secret, known only to the pilots who had flown the modified planes and the few mechanics who understood the ingenuity behind it. Mac's legacy, like many unsung wartime innovations, was quiet yet profound. One small act of curiosity and persistence had rippled through the war effort, giving American pilots an advantage that shifted tactical dynamics and saved countless lives. It was a reminder that in war, brilliance often emerges from the margins, from the overlooked and underestimated minds who refuse to accept defeat. As the P-38 continued its legendary service across the Pacific, the story of the wire remained untold in manuals, absent from official records, yet unforgettable to the pilots who owed their survival to it. The skies over Guadalcanal, the Solomons, and beyond had been changed forever, not just by planes or pilots, but by the quiet ingenuity of one mechanic who refused to accept limitations. In the end, the lesson was clear. History often remembers the pilots, the victories, the battles, but sometimes the smallest innovations, the wire, the tweak, the daring idea, alter the course of events in ways that echo far beyond their humble origins. Mac's wire was more than a trick. It was a symbol of human ingenuity, courage, and the enduring power of creative problem-solving under the most extreme circumstances. And so, the legend of the P-38 Lightning, outmaneuvering every Zero, owes as much to the hands of a single mechanic as it does to the aces who flew it into history. By the closing months of World War II, the P-38 Lightning had cemented its place in history, not merely as an aircraft, but as a symbol of innovation, resilience, and adaptability. From the smoke-filled skies over Guadalcanal to the distant reaches of New Guinea and the Philippines, the twin-boom fighter had become synonymous with American air power. Pilots praised its speed, firepower, and now, thanks to an unassuming mechanic's ingenuity, its newfound maneuverability. Corporal Frank Mac McConnell never sought fame. In the annals of war, his name rarely appears. He remained in the hangars, tweaking wires, repairing engines, and quietly ensuring the aircraft could perform beyond what manuals prescribed. But those who flew the Lightnings remembered him vividly. Captain Richard Bong, reflecting years later on his 40 confirmed kills, remarked, "I like to think that some of our survival, some of our victories, weren't just because of skill of the air, they were because Mac refused to let the plane fail us." Historians have since acknowledged the profound impact of such behind-the-scenes innovation. According to John B. Lundstrom, author of the first team in the Guadalcanal campaign, many of the innovations that changed the tide of war came not from generals or engineers in distant offices, but from the ingenuity of ground crews and mechanics. Mac's wire is a perfect example. Simple, effective, and invisible to the enemy. The Japanese, unaware of the secret that gave the P-38 its edge, continued to adapt their tactics, but they never fully accounted for the subtle mechanical brilliance embedded in those Lightnings. For them, the American planes had become something almost mythical, able to outturn, outdive, and outfight the legendary Zero. For the pilots, the wire was more than a technical modification. It was a lifeline, a hidden advantage that transformed fear into confidence. Beyond statistics and battle reports, the story of Mac and his wire reminds us of a deeper truth about war and human ingenuity. In the chaos of conflict, it is often the small, overlooked acts, the late-night experiments, the whispered suggestions, the audacious tweaks that tip the scales. One mechanic, armed with curiosity and determination, reshaped aerial combat without a single official commendation. His contribution, invisible to many, was no less vital than that of the aces who soared above the Pacific. As the war drew to a close in 1945, the P-38 was gradually retired from frontline service, replaced by newer aircraft. But its legend endured, and so did the quiet legacy of Mac's innovation. In airfields, hangars, and historical records, the story of the Lightning became a testament to the interplay between human skill and mechanical ingenuity. It was a reminder that history is shaped not only by those in command, but by the countless hands, minds, and hearts working tirelessly behind the scenes. And so, when we look at the Pacific skies of 1942 to 1943, when we hear tales of daring aces and impossible dogfights, we must also remember the mechanic with the stupid wire. His small act of brilliance, hidden from view, allowed the P-38 to dance with the Zero, to survive, to dominate, and in doing so, helped shape the course of the war. In the end, innovation often comes in quiet, unassuming forms. One wire, a single mechanic, and a fleet of lightnings change history. Not in the headlines, but in the hearts and memories of those who flew, fought, and survived. The P-38 Lightning would forever soar as a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and the power of an idea, no matter how small, humble, or stupid it might seem at first. In the end, the story of the P-38 Lightning reminds us that war is never just about weapons or numbers. It is about creative minds and courageous hearts refusing to surrender. One mechanic, armed with his stupid little wire, didn't just change the flight of a plane. He changed the course of history. Across the skies of the Pacific, fear and doubt were transformed into confidence and power, and moments of danger became extraordinary victories. That small wire in the hands that refuse to accept the impossible remind us that greatness often lies in the smallest details, in silent ingenuity, in ideas dismissed by others. And as we honor the heroes of war, we must also remember the unseen innovators whose brilliance quietly shaped the outcome of battles. Ultimately, the lesson of the P-38 and its mechanic is timeless. Even the simplest idea, the tiniest spark of ingenuity, can turn the tide and leave an unforgettable mark on history.